She wasn't supposed to be there. Hell, she wasn't even supposed to touch a weapon. While Navy SEALs, America's deadliest warriors, fired round after round into empty air, missing every shot, Evelyn Ward sat in the back with a notebook and pen. Just an analyst, just an observer, just someone the brass sent to write reports about what the real operators did in the field. But when the ambush came, when the mortars started falling, and the SEALs realized they were trapped in a kill zone designed specifically to destroy them, she did something that changed everything. She set down her notebook, picked up a rifle no one knew she had, and walked into that valley of death alone. The Chinook's rotors beat against the thin mountain air as it descended toward the landing zone. Through the open door, rocks stretched out below in shades of brown and gray. Endless valleys carved by ancient rivers. Ridge lines that looked like broken teeth against the sky. And somewhere down there, an enemy that had learned to use this terrain like a weapon. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Ward sat near the rear ramp, her compact frame pressed against the helicopter's cold metal frame. At 32, she had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. Unremarkable features, brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, wire-rimmed glasses that made her look more like a librarian than a soldier. She wore standard combat fatigues with no special insignia, no Ranger tab, no airborne wings, nothing that would make anyone look twice. In her lap sat a ruggedized laptop and a stack of field notebooks. Intelligence analyst, her orders read: observe SEAL team operations in mountainous terrain. Document tactics, techniques, and procedures for after-action review. Do not interfere with operational command. The SEALs barely acknowledged her presence. Chief Petty Officer Dylan Cross, the team leader, had given her a curt nod when she boarded, then turned his attention back to the mission brief. His men, 8 of America's most elite warriors, were focused, professional, running through final equipment checks with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of hard training. Petty Officer First Class Mason Burke sat across from Evelyn, his bulk making the troop seat look like it was built for children. He glanced at her once, then leaned toward his teammate. Perfect. Brass sends us a pencil pusher to watch us work. Like we need someone taking notes while we're trying not to get killed. His voice was just loud enough for her to hear. Evelyn didn't react, didn't look up from the tablet where she was reviewing topographical maps. She'd heard it all before. The jokes, the dismissal, the assumption that because she carried a laptop instead of a machine gun, she didn't belong in the field. Let them think what they want, she told herself. It made everything easier. The helicopter flared hard and everyone grabbed for handholds as the pilot wrestled with the turbulent air. They were coming in fast and low, using the terrain to mask their approach. Through the door, Evelyn could see the valley opening up below them, a natural corridor flanked by steep ridges, the kind of terrain that funneled movement and limited options. Her eyes tracked across the landscape with systematic precision, noting the cave entrances dotting the far slope, the scattered boulder fields that could hide anything, the single dirt road winding through the valley floor like a scar. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It was also a perfect ambush site. The Chinook touched down in a cloud of dust, and the SEALs were moving before the wheels fully settled. They flowed out of the bird in a tactical formation, weapons up, covering sectors, professional and efficient. Evelyn waited until they had established a perimeter, then gathered her gear and followed. The heat hit her like a physical force. It was barely 800 hours, but the Iraqi sun was already brutal, baking the rocks until they radiated heat like an oven. Dust devils danced across the valley floor, and the wind came in sharp gusts that made you squint and taste grit. Chief Cross was conferring with his lead scout when Evelyn approached. He glanced at her, expression neutral, but not welcoming. Stay close to the command element. Don't wander off, and if things get hot, you hit the dirt and stay down until we tell you otherwise. Clear. Crystal. Chief. Good. We've got intelligence suggesting enemy fighters are using these caves as a staging area. Our job is to observe, identify, and report. If we get a clear shot at high-value targets, we're authorized to engage. But this is primarily a recon mission. Evelyn nodded, making mental notes, even though she'd already memorized the operational brief. Cross turned back to his men, and she drifted toward the rear of the formation, finding a position where she could observe without getting in the way. The team began to move, climbing toward a ridge that would give them overwatch of the valley below. The terrain was treacherous, loose shale that wanted to slide under every step, outcroppings that required careful navigation, exposure to anyone watching from above. But the SEALs moved through it with practiced efficiency, communicating through hand signals and brief radio calls. Evelyn kept pace easily, her breathing controlled despite the altitude and heat. She'd trained in mountains before, lots of mountains in lots of countries whose names never appeared in her official service record. Her legs remembered the rhythm of uphill movement, the way you had to balance speed with sustainability, how to place your feet to minimize noise and maximize stability. They reached the ridge after 30 minutes of climbing. The view was spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The valley spread out below them like a map, every fold and feature visible in the harsh morning light. And there, carved into the far slope, were the caves, dark mouths in the pale stone, any one of which could hide anything. The SEAL sniper team began setting up their hide. Petty Officer 2nd Class Nathan Pierce and his spotter, Petty Officer 3rd Class Alex Ramirez, worked with practiced precision, assembling their rifle, arranging camouflage, calculating ranges and wind speeds. Pierce was a legend in the teams, credited with dozens of confirmed kills across 3 combat deployments. If anyone could reach out and touch targets at these distances, it was him. Evelyn found a position behind a low rock formation, pulled out her binoculars, and began her own observations. Through the lenses, the valley resolved into layers of detail. Heat shimmer rising from sun-baked stone, vegetation patterns that suggested water sources, shadow and light playing tricks on depth perception, and the wind. God, the wind was complicated. It came in gusts from different directions, swirling through the valley in patterns that seemed almost random. She watched dust devils form and dissolve, tracked how the air moved differently at different elevations, noted the thermal currents rising from the darker rocks. Target, Ramirez said quietly. Multiple military-age males, 600 meters, moving between Cave Complex Alpha and Bravo. Through her optics, Evelyn spotted them. 5 fighters, Alaska 47s slung casually across their backs, moving with the confidence of people who didn't expect to be observed. They paused in the open, talking, gesturing, completely exposed. Pierce settled behind his rifle, his breathing slowing as he entered that Zen state that all great shooters cultivated. Wind is 2 to 3 miles per hour left to right. Range 620. On target. His finger tightened on the trigger. The suppressed crack of the .300 Winchester Magnum was sharp but not overwhelming. Downrange. Dust kicked up 3 feet short of the lead fighter's position. Miss, Ramirez said, surprise evident in his voice. Come up, come right. Pierce made adjustments and fired again. This time, the round sparked off the rocks 5 feet to the left of the targets. The fighters reacted immediately, scattering with practiced discipline, disappearing into the cave complex like smoke. What the hell? Pierce muttered. That should have been dead center. From her position, Evelyn watched heat shimmer dance across her field of view. The valley was a thermal cauldron, creating vertical columns of rising air that bent light, and more importantly, bent the path of bullets traveling through it. The wind wasn't just horizontal. It was 3-dimensional, pushing and pulling in ways that standard ballistic calculations didn't account for. She said nothing, just watched, just took notes, just did her job. The situation deteriorated faster than anyone expected. After Pierce's misses, Chief Cross authorized a second sniper element to set up on a different angle. Petty Officer 1st Class Emma Torres and her spotter found a position 200 meters north along the ridge, hoping a different perspective would yield better results. More targets appeared, emboldened by the failed shots. They moved with increasing confidence, some even pausing to look up at the ridge, trying to spot the snipers who'd just announced their presence. It was an invitation. Shoot at us. Waste your ammunition. Reveal your positions. Torres fired. Her round went high, striking the cliff face above the targets. Pierce fired again, low and left, nowhere near the intended point of impact. This is impossible, Ramirez said, frustration cracking his professional composure. We're doing everything right. The math is perfect, but it's like shooting through water. Because you are, Evelyn thought, thermal water made of air and heat and physics that don't behave the way you learned in sniper school. Chief Cross crawled over to Pierce's position, his face tight with concern. Talk to me. What's happening? The wind, Chief. It's not consistent. Every shot is getting pushed differently. The thermals are creating updrafts and downdrafts. It's like the air is swirling. Cross turned to look at the valley, seeing it now not as terrain, but as a tactical problem that had no conventional solution. His team had some of the best shooters in the military, and they couldn't hit targets that were practically standing still. That's when the enemy responded. The first mortar round shrieked out of the sky and impacted 50 meters below their position, throwing up a geyser of dust and fragmented rock. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. "Incoming!" Someone shouted unnecessarily. The second round landed closer. The third landed close enough that shrapnel sang past their position, and Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Mendez screamed as a fragment opened up his left arm. "They've got us bracketed," Burke shouted, already pulling Mendez into cover. "We need to displace." But there was nowhere to go. The ridge behind them dropped off steeply. The approach they had climbed was exposed to the mortar fire. Moving laterally would just expose them to more angles of attack. They were pinned and the enemy knew it. Small arms fire began snapping across their position. Rounds cracked past heads, sparked off rocks, forced everyone down into whatever cover they could find. And it wasn't random fire. It was disciplined, coordinated covering fire, designed to keep them suppressed while the mortars walked closer. Pierce tried another shot, but the incoming fire made it impossible to hold steady. His round went wild, and he cursed with the frustration of a craftsman whose tools had suddenly stopped working. "This is wrong," Cross said, his voice carrying an edge Evelyn had never heard in a SEAL before. "This feels like an ambush, like they were waiting for us." Because they were, she thought, watching the pattern of enemy fire. This isn't random. This is rehearsed. They've trained for this exact scenario. How to deal with American Overwatch positions. How to exploit the terrain. How to turn our advantages into disadvantages. Another mortar. This one landed close enough that the blast wave slapped against them like a physical hand. Ramirez went down with shrapnel in his leg and the corpsman was already scrambling toward him. "We're taking casualties," Cross said into his radio, calling back to headquarters. "Request immediate air support. We are combat ineffective and pinned down." The radio crackled back. "Air support is 18 minutes out. Can you hold?" 18 minutes. It might as well have been 18 hours. The enemy fire was intensifying, not slackening. More fighters were appearing, maneuvering through the cave complex with the confidence of people who knew they had their enemies exactly where they wanted them. Evelyn watched it all through her binoculars, her mind cataloging details, even as the professional soldiers around her scrambled for survival. She saw the pattern now. 3 interlocking positions, each covering the others, creating a crossfire that made movement suicidal. She saw the mortar team adjusting their aim with precision that spoke of forward observers calling corrections. She saw the commander, a figure who hung back, directing the battle with hand signals. And she saw the thermal patterns in the valley, the invisible rivers of air that were defeating every American attempt to return fire effectively. Someone was going to die if this continued, probably multiple someones. The corpsman was already working on his second casualty, and the ammunition counters were dropping toward numbers that made squad leaders nervous. Evelyn set down her binoculars with the kind of careful precision someone might use when making a decision they'd been avoiding. Then she reached into her pack and pulled out something that definitely wasn't on any analyst's standard equipment list. The rifle was compact, black, custom modified in ways that spoke of serious money and serious purpose. A .308 precision rifle, suppressed, with an optic that cost more than most cars. The kind of weapon that existed in a gray area between civilian and military use, the kind that serious professionals carried when they needed to be serious. Burke saw it first. His eyes went wide. "Ward, what the hell? Where did you get that? You're not authorized to." She was already moving, crawling toward a position at the edge of the ridge where the rock formation provided cover from above, but allowed a clear view of the valley below. Chief Cross crawled after her, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "Ward, stand down. You're an analyst, not a shooter." She checked the rifle's chamber with movements that spoke of muscle memory carved deep by thousands of repetitions. "Chief, with respect, I'm trying to keep your men alive. You don't have authority to engage. You're not in the chain of command. You're..." She settled behind the rifle, cheek to stock, breathing already controlled. "Not in your chain of command. That's correct. Something in her voice made Cross pause. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't even confidence. It was the calm certainty of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly what was about to happen and was simply preparing to execute a familiar task. Through her scope, the valley resolved differently than it had through the binoculars. She wasn't looking at terrain or enemy positions. She was reading the air itself, watching how heat shimmer bent the background, tracking patterns in the dust, noting which areas stayed clear, and which filled with thermal distortion. A gust of wind came through. She felt it on her face, timed its passage, waited for the lull that would follow. In that brief moment of relative stillness, she made her shot. The suppressed crack was barely audible over the ongoing firefight. Downrange, 450 meters away, the mortar spotter who'd been calling corrections suddenly pitched forward and didn't get back up. Burke, watching through his scope, went absolutely still. Holy, did she just? Evelyn was already acquiring her next target. She'd seen the machine gunner setting up in a cave mouth, positioning himself to lay down suppressive fire that would keep the SEALs pinned while the mortars did their killing work. He thought he was invisible in the shadows. He wasn't. Her second shot found him before he could fire a single round. The weapon clattered against stone as dead hands released it. Ramirez, despite his wounded leg, had his spotting scope up. 2 for 2, both center mass at ranges where our guys couldn't hit the broad side of a cliff. Cross stared at Evelyn like she'd just sprouted wings. Who the hell are you? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer really because she was in that place now. The zone where conscious thought fell away and instinct took over, where years of training and innate talent combined into something that looked like magic, but was really just excellence refined to its purest form. Her third target was the fighter trying to maneuver to a flanking position. The fourth was the RPG team preparing to bracket the SEAL position with high explosives. The fifth was another mortar spotter, this one farther back, thinking distance would protect him. It didn't. Each shot was deliberate, economical, final. Where the SEALs had been struggling against an environment that defeated their training, Evelyn seemed to read the valley like a book, compensating for conditions they couldn't see, timing her shots for moments when the thermal currents briefly stilled. The enemy fire began to slacken, not because they were retreating, but because key personnel kept disappearing behind precisely placed bullets. The coordinated dance of their ambush was falling apart as leaders and specialists dropped out of the choreography. "She's shooting ghosts," Pierce whispered, watching through his scope as Evelyn put a round through smoke and heat shimmer to drop a fighter who'd been completely obscured from the SEALs' positions. "That's impossible." Torres, from her position farther along the ridge, had stopped trying to engage targets. She was just watching now, studying technique, trying to understand how someone was making shots that defied everything she'd been taught about ballistics and environmental conditions. The enemy commander, the one who'd been directing the battle, made the mistake of keying his radio. The brief glint of metal in the shadows was all Evelyn needed. The shot was nearly 600 meters through thermal currents that had been defeating shooters all morning, but her bullet found him anyway. Without central coordination, the ambush collapsed. Fighters who'd been moving with disciplined precision began making individual decisions based on fear rather than training. And fear made them predictable, made them expose themselves, made them into targets instead of threats. "They're breaking," Cross said, awe evident in his voice. "She's breaking them." The incoming fire dropped to sporadic potshots. The mortars went silent, and for the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs could breathe without expecting to die in the next 5 seconds. Evelyn lowered her rifle, scanned once more for threats, found none. Then she engaged the safety and set the weapon carefully beside her, as if what she'd just done was no more remarkable than completing a training exercise. Cross crawled over to her position, his face a mixture of gratitude and complete confusion. "Ward, Staff Sergeant Ward, I need you to explain what just happened." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, an actual paper notebook, the kind analysts use to record observations, and began writing. "Multiple enemy Kia, ambush disrupted, recommend immediate exfil before they regroup." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." His voice was sharp, but not angry. "Who taught you to shoot like that? What unit were you with?" She met his eyes, and for just a moment, he saw something there that made him reconsider every assumption he'd made about the quiet woman with the glasses and the laptop. Something cold, Something utterly professional, something that had seen violence on a scale that made this morning's firefight look like a training exercise. "Analyst," she said simply. "Just like my orders say." "Bullshit. I've worked with Delta. I've worked with ESA. I've worked with people whose units don't have names. What you just did," he gestured helplessly toward the valley where enemy positions were now silent. "That wasn't luck. That was world-class precision shooting under conditions that were defeating some of the best snipers in the military." Evelyn considered this for a moment, then returned to her notebook. "Your men did well, Chief. They adapted to a difficult tactical situation. That's what matters. My men were getting torn apart until your men kept fighting. They didn't panic. They maintained discipline under fire. That's more important than marksmanship." The sound of rotors interrupted their conversation. The QRF helicopter was inbound, arriving ahead of schedule because someone at headquarters had been monitoring the radio traffic and realized the situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. As the bird flared for landing, Evelyn began packing her gear with systematic efficiency. Laptop secured, notebook stowed, and the custom rifle, the one that shouldn't exist on any analyst's equipment list, carefully disassembled and packed into a case that looked like it might contain camera equipment. Burke approached, his arm bandaged, but functional. He held out a spent brass casing, one that had ejected from her rifle during the firefight. "You should keep this souvenir." She smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Cross had seen on her face all day. "You keep it. Remind you that sometimes the person you're not paying attention to is the person who saves your life." The after-action report was a masterpiece of creative writing. Official version. SEAL team encountered unexpected resistance. Coordinated defensive fire and tactical air support resulted in enemy casualties and successful extraction. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Ward provided valuable intelligence analysis that contributed to mission success. What the report didn't mention was that the analyst had killed 11 enemy fighters in approximately 8 minutes, breaking an ambush that had been specifically designed to destroy American Special Operations Forces, or that her shooting had been so far beyond what anyone expected that Pierce and Torres spent the entire flight back in silent contemplation of their own capabilities, or that Chief Cross had tried to get answers from headquarters about exactly what kind of analyst they'd attached to his team, only to be told that Staff Sergeant Ward's full service record was classified at levels he didn't have access to. Back at base, Evelyn filed her observations, attended the debrief, and answered questions with the bureaucratic precision of someone who'd had extensive practice avoiding detailed explanations. The SEALs performed their mission under difficult conditions, she told the intelligence officer reviewing her report. The thermal conditions in that valley created ballistic challenges that weren't anticipated in the planning phase. Recommend future operations in similar terrain include specific training on shooting through thermal currents. And your own actions. I provided overwatch and defensive fire as needed. Standard procedure when an element is under attack. Your service record says you're a signals intelligence analyst. It doesn't mention sniper training. Evelyn's expression didn't change. My service record says what it needs to say. The intelligence officer stared at her for a long moment, then closed the file. You're being reassigned. Effective immediately. New orders will be delivered by courier. She wasn't surprised. This was how it worked. You appeared where you were needed, did what was necessary, then disappeared back into whatever administrative shadow you'd emerged from. The military was good at making people vanish when it needed to, both enemy fighters and its own personnel. That evening, she found Chief Cross on the base perimeter, staring out at the mountains where they had almost died that morning. "You're leaving," he said without turning around. It wasn't a question. "New assignment. Where?" "Can't say. Can't or won't. Both." Cross was quiet for a moment. "My men are alive because of you. Pierce is alive. Ramirez is alive. Burke, Torres, all of them. They'll never forget that, but they'll also never know the whole story, will they? The whole story is exactly what the report says. Your team encountered resistance. You fought through it. Everyone came home. And the woman who shot like she'd been doing it for 20 years, the analyst who carried a custom rifle and made impossible shots look routine." Evelyn smiled slightly. Sometimes the best analysts are the ones who've spent time in the field. Helps you understand what the data really means. That's the line you're going with. It's a good line. Clean. Fits the narrative. Cross turned to look at her directly. I've been in this business a long time. I've worked with people who don't officially exist. People who do things that never officially happen. And I learned that the best ones are the ones you never see coming. The ones who look like they belong in an office somewhere pushing papers and analyzing reports. Sounds very dramatic, Chief. Am I wrong? She didn't answer. Just looked out at the mountains, at the horizon where the sun was setting in bands of red and gold. Your men did good work today. They kept their heads when things went sideways. That's what matters. The rest is just details. Details like the fact that you saved all our lives. Details like the fact that you've got a good team who watch each other's backs. Hold on to that. It's rarer than you think. The courier arrived the next morning with sealed orders. By noon, Evelyn was on a transport heading to another assignment in another country where she would probably adopt another role that had nothing to do with what she actually did. The SEALs watched her leave with a mixture of respect and confusion that would never fully resolve. Burke had the brass casing mounted and hung in the team room, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the most dangerous people were often the ones you dismissed, the ones you never saw as threats. Until the moment they chose to be. Pierce spent hours researching long-range precision shooting through thermal distortions, trying to understand how she'd done what she'd done. He never quite figured it out, but it made him a better shooter, so he figured the education was worth the frustration. And Chief Cross, he kept his mouth shut about the whole thing because he understood that some people operated at levels where the rules were different, where the chain of command had branches that never appeared on organizational charts, and where the line between analyst and operator was sometimes deliberately blurred for reasons that served purposes he didn't need to understand. 5 months later, his team was conducting operations in Syria when they received intelligence about enemy positions from an analyst attached to another unit. The report was comprehensive, detailed, and tactically brilliant, showing not just where the enemy was, but how they would react, what they would do, where they would be vulnerable. At the bottom of the report in the analyst's signature block was a name he didn't recognize, but the writing style was familiar. The insights were the kind that only came from someone who'd spent time on the business end of firefights. And there was a notation in the metadata that only someone looking would notice. The author's initials, E.W. Cross smiled slightly, filed the report, and briefed his team on the mission. Somewhere out there, an analyst was making sure operators stayed alive by knowing exactly what they needed to know, delivered at exactly the right time. And if that analyst occasionally picked up a rifle and demonstrated skills that went far beyond data analysis, well, some secrets were better left unexamined. Some questions were better left unasked. And some heroes preferred to work in shadows, doing necessary things that would never make it into official histories. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation is the one you're not paying attention to. The quiet professional, the one taking notes in the back, the one who seems like they're just there to watch, right up until the moment they decide it's time to stop watching and start acting. And then you realize that the wolf was there all along. You just didn't recognize it because it wasn't howling at the moon. It was sitting quietly, observing, waiting for the right moment to remind everyone what real professionals look like when everything is on the line. Years later, Pierce would tell new snipers joining the teams about the day an analyst outshot the best precision marksman in the military. He never used her name, didn't know if he was allowed to, but he always ended the story the same way. The person who looks least dangerous might be the most dangerous person in the room. Never forget that. Ramirez kept a photograph from that deployment in the Iraqi mountains. You couldn't see Evelyn in it. She had always managed to be just outside the frame or turning away when cameras appeared, but he swore you could see her shadow in one corner. He kept it as a reminder that some guardian angels wore combat boots and carried rifles instead of wings. Torres eventually made it to instructor duty, training the next generation of SEAL snipers at Naval Special Warfare training facilities. She always included a section on shooting through environmental challenges, thermal distortions, and wind patterns that didn't follow textbook predictions. When students asked where she learned these techniques, she'd smile and say, "From someone who was better at it than I'll ever be." And somewhere in another conflict zone under another sky, an analyst sat in the back of a briefing room with a laptop and notebooks, looking unremarkable and forgettable while operators planned their next mission. She listened, took notes, asked quiet questions that made everyone think a little harder about their assumptions. Just an analyst, Just an observer, just someone there to document what the real warriors did in the field, until the moment came when she wasn't. Because the most effective weapon isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one nobody sees coming until it's already changed everything. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It simply does what wolves do, quietly and efficiently, while everyone else is looking somewhere else. Evelyn Ward understood this truth better than anyone. She'd built a career on being underestimated, on letting people see what they expected to see while keeping her true capabilities carefully hidden. It was safer that way, for her and for the people she protected. The brass casing Burke had mounted still hung in the SEAL team room, polished and preserved. Beneath it, someone had engraved a single word that captured everything they had learned that day: respect. Not because she demanded it, not because she'd sought recognition or glory, but because she'd earned it in the only currency that mattered to warriors, by putting herself on the line when it counted most, by doing what needed to be done when everyone else couldn't, and by disappearing afterward as if none of it had ever happened. That's what real professionals do. They show up, they perform, they leave, and the only evidence they were ever there is the fact that people who should be dead are still breathing.